When you piece all these jigsaw pieces together, you see that America is confirmed, is stepping back, is disengaging from Europe, and it's quite right that we now look with our allies to strengthen our own defence posture.
Keir Starmer did his big speech this morning. He said that the solidarity of peace is softening under our feet. Now, he was addressing world leaders, and he said that while America remains an indispensable ally, it's time for Europe and the UK to work closer together to build a more European NATO. And Sir Keir Starmer was very clear who the enemy of the future is.
Russia has proved its appetite for aggression. NATO has warned that Russia could be ready to use military force against the alliance by the end of this decade.
Now, Keir Starmer also called for a more European NATO and a shift from over-dependence on the United States to interdependence amid concerns that Donald Trump holds all the cards because of America's military might. Well, let's now catch up with Tobias Ellwood, former Conservative minister. He also chaired the Defence Select Committee between 2020 and 2023, and he's just returned from that conference in Munich. Tobias, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon. I recall speaking to you on this show a year ago when we were wondering what next for Russia, but then we're invited to ask ourselves what next for America when J.D. Vance gave that speech that rewrote America's relationship with friend and foe. And it's clear from what we've seen in Munich that we're still there. We're still wondering what to do about Russia and our support for Ukraine, and wondering what to do about America. So these are very, very unsettling times indeed.
It's so interesting you said that, made that point about J.D. Vance, because I feel that is like bookmarked in my head now, because it was an extraordinary moment, because I think that's the first, I mean, Donald Trump had just had like a very long phone call with President Putin, and eyebrows were raised over that. And then we had, as you say, this very, very quite full frontal attack on Europe from America. And it does feel that that conference last year has catalysed this incredible turn of events where, as you say, it was very easy a year ago to be like the enemy was Russia, but now it's much more complicated. There's a much more complicated relationship and discussion with America going on. A year on, where do you think we are, Tobias?
Well, I think we're even in a more confused space because we simply don't know whether America can be relied upon. What is America's priorities? Marco Rubio, who's a friend of Britain. He's been a senator for a long time, chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. A lot of MPs know him well. He is a huge supporter of Ukraine in the past, certainly, and of Europe and NATO. And yet here he is as the chief flag bearer for Trump's policies. And I think he was wise not to follow J.D. Vance's lines last year to wind the European nations up at the Munich Security Conference. He took a much more mellowed approach, but that doesn't disguise what America is doing. Bigger picture, it is disengaging from Europe. Pete Hegseth, who's the defense secretary, or what he calls the war secretary now, was supposed to be in Brussels a few days ago at that important NATO summit, which is critical, because then all the NATO partners then come to Munich and then clarify what our positions are. But the Americans weren't properly represented at the highest level. Rubio, whilst in Munich, missed the big discussions about what next for Ukraine. He didn't even turn up to that as well, citing a clash in his diary. That should have been the key meeting to go to. And America is no longer gifting any equipment. Let's make this really clear. We're all sliding stuff across the table, making contributions to help with the war effort in Ukraine. America isn't doing that anymore. American equipment is going, but Europeans are having to buy it. Now, I recall a couple of times in the last decade or so where we've stood firm next to America when they called us up to go to war. We didn't charge America for that. We didn't say we're going to, charge you for the equipment and so on. And we took heavy losses in Afghanistan and indeed Iraq. And yet America isn't there by our side today. And where is Rubio going after the Munich Security Summit? Not to Finland, to the front line, not to Sweden or indeed Britain. He's actually going to Hungary on a political visit to prop up Viktor Orban there. When you piece all these jigsaw pieces together, you see that America is confirmed, is stepping back, is disengaging from Europe, and it's quite right that we now look with our allies to strengthen our own defence posture.
Gosh, I mean, it's very interesting, and arresting, Tobias, just hearing you spell it out like that, because the picture you've just painted is very much a disconnected US, not even going through the diplomatic niceties of turning up at the right meetings. As you say, making sure that we are paying them. I mean, do we have to be more honest about where things are with America now?
We do, and we've been blind, I think, for the last year. You know, leader after leader, you saw it on television, going into the Oval Office on bended knee, begging Trump to say, please stay with us, recognize Putin is the enemy, don't bring Moscow in for the cold, and he's kept us on the edge and not making a decision again and again. And the first time that I saw Europe stand up to Trump, which I think was well worth doing, was when we rallied around Denmark to say, no, Greenland is off limits. You're not going to annex that country, Donald Trump. And I think there is a message for the Europeans to say, absolutely, this is our closest security ally. And when Europe and America are on the same page, both benefit. But when Trump is going down this isolationist approach, we need to stand together and stand up to Trump, because this isn't in America's interest. And I would go even further and say it's actually un-American as well. I know there are many in Congress that are really shaking their heads privately, saying where Donald Trump is going, particularly with his Partnership for Peace program, threatening the United Nations as well, not least with withdrawing its general support from Europe, is dangerous indeed, and not what America has strived to do for the last, 7 or 8 decades.
And what do you think this should mean for Keir Starmer in terms of how he navigates his relationship with Donald Trump? Because he, of course, has put a lot of store in the fact that he's got, a on paper good relationship with Donald Trump. I mean, to the point where he's even, had some criticism from people on his own side that he's too close to Donald Trump. What should he do going forward?
It is difficult for the Prime Minister that, as I say, this is our closest security ally. But what we see privately and what we see publicly are clearly two different things. It needs to be explained to the American president that he doesn't have the assets to look after the High North. Their submarine fleet is not in a good condition. Working together with NATO absolutely makes sense. So withdrawing, if Russia is the enemy at the moment in the High North, is the wrong way to go about it. Not least, there's also a new form of warfare taking place, grey zone warfare. We see it every day in Britain. The cyber attacks that take place, Land Rover was the latest. It's the Five Eyes community that is most powerful in dealing with that. So distancing himself from Europe and Britain and so forth in this way, disengaging, doesn't make sense given where the character of conflict itself is going in the longer term. Let's stay together. That should be the message that comes from Europe and indeed Britain. But at the same time, recognizing that if Trump chooses to continue down this path, we've got to look east and put that fire out. 4 years on from that invasion, we're still mulling over what on earth to do about an aggressive Russia. And
that is so important. All these conferences are being had, and we haven't really made progress on that issue. And it feels like the conversations that are being had, we had this discussion in Oman a couple of weeks ago with the Ukrainians sitting down with America and some of the Russians, but it didn't go anywhere. And it's not like Europe is, the EU and European leaders aren't even at the table for those discussions. It doesn't feel like we've actually made any progress on Ukraine.
No, you're right. I mean, you put it very delicately, but let's be clear. How many times did we go around that buoy of meetings about meetings, talks about talks, nothing getting anywhere? The bottom line is no Ukrainian president is going to want to give away 1/5 of its territory in any time of the year, at any moment. And therefore, and on the other side, Putin is never going to say, fine, I'm going to allow Ukraine to join NATO for security reasons in the longer term. We all know that Putin has got a bigger picture, a bigger strategic objective in mind to go well beyond Ukraine. America doesn't understand that. We do. Therefore, we need to actually give Ukraine the assets, the kit that it needs. We've been too risk averse from the very start. You remember the public debates about anti-tank missiles, tanks themselves, F-16s, long-range missiles, whether we can hit things at range in Russia. Big public debates spooked by Putin coming back saying, you dare cross that line and I might go nuclear. Well, we need to rekindle a sense of Cold War statecraft, if you like, to be able to look our adversary in the eye we've got there eventually. All that kit eventually slid across the table, but it took months and months and months. And each time Russia was able to prepare in advance. That's not the way that you deal with an adversary, particularly somebody like Putin.
Well, look, Tobias, as ever, always fascinating to catch up with you and get your take on these big geopolitical matters. Thanks very much for your time. That's Tobias Ellwood, former Conservative Minister and former chair of the Defence Select Committee, who's just got back from Munich. And I think it was very interesting just hearing him just being really honest about the fact that there is a new reality and the US has disconnected, and we're in a new reality, and we've got to face that fact, and that isn't going to involve money going to defence at a time when there isn't a huge amount of money, but that is going to have to happen. But it's not easy. None of this is easy at all. But I think we have to face up to facts about where we are right now.